Resuming debate, the honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this budget is another failure by this Liberal Prime Minister and his Finance Minister. More taxes, more debt, more spending that doesn't offer solutions for hardworking Canadians. Instead, it saddles us, our children and our grandchildren, and even our great-grandchildren with billions of dollars worth of debt at a time when interest rates are rising. Budget 2018 was a huge opportunity for the Prime Minister. The world economy is roaring, but this Liberal government is failing to turn this favourable climate into results for Canadians. Instead, the Prime Minister is raising taxes on over 90% of Canadian middle-class families, and this budget announces new tax hikes on local businesses. The Liberals are also borrowing an additional $18 billion, well actually, Madam Speaker, that's now risen to $22 billion just since this morning, adding another $22 billion in deficit to the budget. And despite all the spending, middle-class Canadians are no further ahead, and Canada's GDP growth will slow to 2% by the end of this year. After the budget was presented, I spoke with the chairs of the Greater Waterloo Chamber of Commerce and the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, and Madam Speaker, their words speak volumes about the measures in this failed budget. Greg DeRocher, President and CEO of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, had this to say, quote, "This seems to be a typical budget from a government that has seen better days in the battlefield. As a result of the massive campaign led by the Chamber movement across the country, there was some moderate tweaking of the passive income tax calculation for small business owners. The real problem with this legislation is that it is not going to achieve the objectives they intended it to. You can't get to the wealthiest 1% by targeting middle-class entrepreneurs. It's simply wrong, and it will still cost small business owners $1 billion taken out of the economy. There's nothing to make Canadian business more competitive, given the massive tax reductions in the U.S., our biggest competitor, and possible derailing of NAFTA talks, which would cause a travesty in Canada for the business community. Supporting female entrepreneurs is a good thing. Frankly, it's a shame we have to do this, and gender equality should be a foregone conclusion." He goes on to say, Madam Speaker, "We are still very much concerned with a government who simply believes that a spending spree will be good for Canadians and, more importantly, good for our future leaders. We cannot continue to spend more than we take in. The time was right during the recession of 2008-2009. Now, when the government itself says our economy is good, is the time to eliminate deficits, to pay down debt, and to provide relief for business and individuals who are still struggling to grow and get into the prosperity of the economy this government keeps talking about." Madam Speaker, I'm not sure I could have said it much better myself. I also heard from Art Sinclair, the Vice President of the Greater Waterloo Chamber, who had this to say, quote, "Small businesses across Waterloo Region and Canada need a tax system that is fair and straightforward in its application. Our Chamber has been consistently informed by our membership that new rules are making the system more complex and time-consuming for companies who should be focused on growth and job creation." End quote. Madam Speaker, this budget fails Canadians in many areas, but let me focus on three for the next few minutes. First, infrastructure. This government campaigned on increasing spending on infrastructure, a promise that was popular across Canada. However, what we've seen is that even though this government is spending at record levels, very little is going into infrastructure. Meanwhile, the government is squandering $35 billion on a new Asian infrastructure bank that helps wealthy investors and ignores Canadians who want shorter commute times. In fact, this budget indicated the Liberal government is planning on cutting funding for infrastructure over the next few years. The Parliamentary Budget Officer wrote in the report titled Budget 2018 Issues for Parliamentarians, quote, "Budget 2018 provides an incomplete account for the changes to the government's $186.7 billion infrastructure spending plan. Parliamentary Budget Officer requested the new plan, but it does not exist. It does not exist. Roughly 1/4 of the funding allocated for infrastructure from 2016-17 to 2018-19 will lapse. Both legacy and new infrastructure programs are prone to large lapses." End of quote. That from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Another broken promise by the Liberals. Second, let me talk about the carbon tax. Over 200 pages of this budget bill create a complicated and costly new carbon tax in all provinces that don't already have their own. That tax will raise the cost of heat, gas, groceries, and everything else that Canadians need. Madam Speaker, a carbon tax will not work. Carbon taxes do not decrease emissions, and they hurt the national economy by increasing the cost of living, all the while making the country less competitive globally. In fact, just today, as I mentioned, the Parliamentary Budget Officer announced that a carbon tax will take $10 billion from our Canadian economy. Knowing all of this, the Liberal government is still moving ahead with this bad decision. Unfortunately, that's not even half the problem, Madam Speaker. The Liberal government knows full well how much the carbon tax will cost the average family, but they refuse to let Canadians know. Officials from the Department of Finance have let us know that we can expect to see an 11-cent increase per litre on gasoline and an extra $264 for natural gas home heating per year. Oil heating costs even more. Trevor Tome at the University of Calgary estimates the carbon tax will cost $1,100 additional funding cost per family, and other estimates are as high as $2,500 per family just from the carbon tax implementation. Madam Speaker, that may not sound like a lot of money to the members opposite, but I've spent 12 years in this House making sure that my constituents in Kitchener-Conestoga get to keep more of their hard-earned money in their own pockets, not less, and I will keep fighting that fight. The Parliamentary Budget Officer wrote in the most recent Economic and Fiscal Outlook, quote, implementation of the federal government's carbon pricing levy will generate a headwind for the Canadian economy. Over the medium term, as the levy rises from $10 per tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent to 2018, when it's $50 per tonne in 2022. Based on analysis conducted by the Ecofiscal Commission, we project that real GDP will be 0.5% lower in 2022 than it would otherwise be. 0.5% lower. This amounts to $10 billion in 2022, end of quote. So not only will families be paying more, but we now know that our economy is guaranteed to suffer as well as a result. Madam Speaker, the government also knows whether or not their carbon tax will decrease emissions. But yet again, we get no answers. My colleague, the Honourable Member for Carleton, has asked it for time and time again, and I'll ask it now. What exactly does this Liberal government have to hide? Third, Madam Speaker, the national debt and out-of-control spending. Canada started the new fiscal year on April 1, 2018, with $1 trillion worth of market debt. This is the total debt upon which the Government of Canada pays interest. The net debt is $669 billion. We all remember during the 2015 election campaign when the Prime Minister, then the leader of the third party, promised that if elected, a Liberal government would run a small deficit and return to balance by 2019. Instead, the deficits have been twice what he promised, and Finance Canada now projects deficits for another 25 years, totaling almost $500 billion. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, in his review of Budget 2018, had this to say in regards to the growing deficit and debt. Quote, despite commitments made in the Minister of Finance's mandate letter and in Budget 2016, the government has not explicitly mentioned its fiscal anchors of balancing the budget and continuing to reduce the federal debt-to-GDP ratio in subsequent fall economic statements or budgets, including Budget 2018. The Liberal deficits today will require massive new tax increases soon after the election. Canadians will pay more tax to fund interest payments to wealthy lenders. That is money that isn't being spent on our veterans, health care, national defence, or on real tax relief for middle class. Madam Speaker, with the small amount of time that I have left, I'll be sharing the positive vision that we as Conservatives have for our country. We on this side of the House have introduced legislation that supports young families, new parents, and persons with disabilities. We've introduced legislation that provides more transparency about how taxpayer money is spent, and we will always support policies that will create jobs and grow our economy. We'll remove red tape, remove obstacles that are in the way of young entrepreneurs who are trying to start and to grow their business. I know that our leader, the leader of the opposition, has his private members bill up for debate soon. I hope that members across the way will support this common sense legislation that will actually help new families, not saddle them with higher taxes. This budget has been described by some as an election budget. Well, Madam Speaker, While the Liberals are focused on trying to get re-elected, I'll keep focusing on the hard-working people in Kitchener, Wellesley, Woolwich, and Wilmot. The people in my riding know how to work hard and contribute to the improvement of our community. I want to see them rewarded for their efforts, not saddled with mountains of debt. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I must say I enjoyed listening to my colleague's remarks in his single vision of a number of pieces that he's pulled out of a number of reports without any context at all, some quite misleading. When he talks about the $1 million or $1 billion in the market debt, what he forgets to mention is the first time it went to that number was in 2012 under the Harper government. What? And indeed that market debt includes Crown corporations and others. So the misleading statements are not helpful to Canadians in terms of their understanding what it really is. I'd ask the honourable member if he doesn't think it's irresponsible to provide only partial information. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Madam Speaker, that has been the argument I've been making all day today in this House. We are getting partial information from this government in this budget implementation bill. There's nothing in here telling us what the carbon tax will cost us. There's nothing in here to tell us when the budget will be balanced, in spite of a very clear promise made by virtually every member of that party during the last campaign. I remember it. $10 billion deficit maximum, balanced by 2019. We're now, this year, when it should have been $6 billion, according to their projections, $18 billion, oh no, today, the Parliamentary Budget Officer said it's not only $18 billion, it's $22 billion. So I am absolutely opposed to partial information. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Longueuil, Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's quite clear that those two parties seem to influence each other, sometimes for the better, mostly for the worst. We've been seized with a 500-page omnibus bill. We know that this was a habit previously. But in all of this situation, there are supposedly good intentions when it comes to gender equality, but no money has been set aside for that. And my question is about that. What concrete measures are there for gender equality in this budget?
Well, Madam Speaker, I would just like to pick up on the comment that my colleague made about the omnibus budget. 540 pages, Madam Speaker. And of those 500, well over 200 pages of it dealing directly with the carbon tax. And again, no indication of cost. So, Madam Speaker, I can't answer specifically the question as to how much is directed towards gender equality, but based on the misinformation that we have in this budget and that we've been given all day today, I'm not very confident that we'll get an accurate figure for that either. Thank you, Madam.
Comments? The honourable member for Kitchener South Espler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the honourable member mentioned a couple quotes. I want to give him a quote of the Business Development Bank of Canada. Canada has solid economic growth in 2017. Our economy is on solid footing. Also, Canada should have a solid growth of 2.2% in 2018, and some estimates are even higher. But I want to quote the member of him saying that infrastructure spending is very little. I want him to take a drive in his constituency, in his region, because we've invested $97 million to expand the highway. We've spent billions of dollars getting the light rail transit in our region. We've spent millions of dollars in infrastructure, underground maintenance, water mains, wastewater treatment programs, millions of dollars spent in our riding. I would encourage the honourable member to take a drive and see all the construction in our region.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm thrilled that my neighbour, my colleague from Kitchener South Hespler, mentioned light rail transit. Madam Speaker, when I was elected in 2006, light rail transit was one of the things I championed as a member of Parliament for the Waterloo region, and I was honoured to stand with our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Stephen Harper, when we announced federal funding for the light rail transit in the Waterloo region. It's because of this government, when we were in government, announcement of that funding, that much of that infrastructure spending is being done and achieving the results that my colleague mentions, and I'm grateful for those results. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, reprise de